Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth instalment of the LaunchPad Essentials Seminar program for the end of 2021. I'm David Linke, the Managing Director at EduGrowth. For those who are new to us, we are Australia's education, technology and innovation industry hub. Through connection and collaboration, we accelerate Australia's EdTech ecosystem globally. EduGrowth exists today because of the vision and leadership shown by our 6 founding partners and the 9 strategic partners we have today. They saw the opportunity exist in Australia to be a global leader in education technology. We thank all of these organisations, together with all of our strategic partners who have supported us on this mission to impact global communities with the acceleration of Australian EdTech. I'd like to especially thank our partners in today's event, AWS EdStart, the startup program for education technology companies, and AWS themselves. Without their support, programs like today are not possible. Before we launch in today's program, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. As we are gathered physically dispersed but virtually connected, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise their continuous and unbroken connection to land, waters and culture across the country. Today I'm joining you from the unceded land of the Bunurong, Boiwurrung and the Boiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I extend all our respects to their elders past, present and emerging in all of Australia, including those from where you are joining us today. I especially welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are present with us as well. As I mentioned up front, EduGrowth exists because of our partners who work with us to bring these programs to life. Mo Ziadin from AWS is one of those partners. Mo will join us to provide some insight to the work that AWS do and AWS EdStart team do to support the Australian EdTech ecosystem. Welcome, Mo.
Thanks.
And Mo, how
Thanks,
are you?
David. I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And David, thanks for having me here and giving me the opportunity to speak. So to everyone those who don't know me or those who know me again, I am Mo. I am the education technology lead here at AWS for Australia. And I also cover some part of New Zealand as well. My role is typically to work with EdTechs, not just from the customer and vendor standpoint, but also work in partnership, to execute the go-to-market strategies and co-sell and co-grow the territory. Now, since AWS is the market leader in the cloud space, and we believe that we believe that we are supporting a tech community and a techs nationally. So hence we partnered with partners like EduGrowth, where we can get that exposure in front of the entire tech community, if not all, but most of the entire tech community. And we would like to leverage this partnership to take our message out in the market that AWS is here to support you right from your idea to the implementation, and post-implementation we would also help and work with you in partnership in co-selling activities, co-marketing activities. We have marketplace, which is like an extended sales arm for you. So there are various different tools that are available to work with these edtechs. Now we also have some programs that are specifically for EdTech partners or customers. We have programs like EdStart that David has mentioned, which is for startup EdTechs, and then we have other programs like POAs and fundings available when we are working on joint opportunities for a customer. We want to do this for the betterment of our education sectors, and so we can provide like great tools and technologies to our customers. That's why we would like to spend as much time as possible with the techs and do the necessary to provide to have the disruption in the education. So with that being said, my contact details will be shared later. So if you guys want to reach out to me for any inquiry, for any assistance or any partnership opportunities, please feel free to do that. Thank you, David.
Thanks very much, Mo. And I think we'll put your contact details up in the chat box so that people can make contact with you, and we'll also include it in the follow-up email for anybody who's with us today. And as Mo mentioned, AWS are a really important partner for us here at EduGrowth. We've been working with AWS and AWS Head Start now for, I think it's 3 or 4 years, and AWS is a great partner for us. And I know that at the beginning of the pandemic in early 2020, AWS worked really closely with the Australian EdTech community, and especially those companies that are hosted by them, to start looking at how they can support them with what was sort of a really I'll use the term actually, an unprecedented time where we didn't sort of really know what was happening. So AWS are a great partner, so thank you very much. And this program is directly supported by AWS, where we get an opportunity to have a whole bunch of people together thinking about building EdTech startups. And today we're going to be looking at mentoring. We've got Gerard, Holland, the CEO of Outcome Life, will share his personal journey as an EdTech founder and the mentors that he's connected with along the way, especially in the early part and now as well. So our agenda looks pretty simple. We're going to chat to Gerard for a half an hour or so. You can ask questions at any point along. You can use the chat box, and I'll end up over here. If you've got an insight or thought, just want to share that with the people who are on this call and are in the same place that you are, you can just drop it in there and it'll get through to us here on the stage. And then final hour this afternoon it'll be an interactive. We have 15 mentors here to connect with early stage EdTech founders to answer your questions. I think you'll get to meet with a range of mentors over the hour through an automated matching process where you'll be able to get, I think it's 5 or 10 minute blocks of time, and you get to extend it if you're having a great conversation with someone. Then you sort of go into the queue and you can meet with somebody else. But before we start launching into that piece, why don't we actually have a conversation about mentoring and what it is? So allow me to welcome Gerard Holland, the CEO of Outcome Life and its spin-off companies MentorMatch and MentorMatch. Gerard is a chartered accountant, we won't hold that against him, and has been a business advisor to middle market businesses for a very long time and been leading Outcome Life. I think it's 4 or 5 years, but we're going to find out in a second. So welcome, Gerard.
Thanks, David, and hi everyone.
Chartered accountant.
Yeah, as you said, you won't hold it against me, so let's drop that. So
all right, we'll move on. No issues. You've moved to do some real work then now.
Well, I did do a Masters of Entrepreneurship and Innovation in 2012, and I quickly decided that I'd much prefer to have an entrepreneurial mindset than an accounting analytical mindset. And it took me about 2 years to get the analytical, risk-averse, risky attitude out of my mind so I could be more entrepreneurial. But you can train to be an entrepreneur.
Fantastic. So why don't we jump in there a little bit? Why don't we begin with you telling us a little bit about Outcome Life, your journey there, and maybe we'll pick up this thread of what a mentor means and how you've used mentors over your journey.
Yeah, sure. And just a quick shout out to AWS too. We've received a number of credits over the years. Mo actually helped us get some of it. So AWS have been a big support of ours. All our platforms run off AWS, and particularly in the early years, it was so valuable just to have those credits available. So thank you to AWS for how you are supporting EdTech or startup businesses in Australia. It helped us enormously. My story, so I might actually start, I did work in corporate, as David mentioned. I understand there's probably some people listening that maybe have corporate jobs and are thinking about starting a business and an EdTech business, and maybe some have made the leap, but I knew I wanted to start a business at some point in time when I was working in corporate. Having the courage to do it is difficult. And as I mentioned before, I did a Masters of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And through that Masters actually gave me the courage to actually take the leap of faith. And so through a number of conversations with people who were also entrepreneurial to find an idea, I always thought, if I have an idea, I'll be a millionaire. And that was the most ridiculous thing you can ever think, because execution is 1,000 times harder than the idea part of it. But eventually came up with a concept where Outcome.Life was born, and it was to help international students. But the business we run today is not actually the business plan that we developed back then. We were originally trying to help students choose where to get educated. We wrote a business plan, 42 pages, and we went and raised $500,000 on the back of that. Literally hadn't written a line of code. We had no customers, no revenue, no nothing, and somehow convinced people to give us $553,000. And that's what started the business. But 9 months in, we realized we're solving the wrong problem. And we pivoted the business to focus on employability for international students. And years on, we're now doing a whole range of other things and operating in South Africa, the UK, Canada, Australia, and into the US. So we've globalized the business in the last 18 months. But yeah, my point of that story is that your first idea is probably not the one you're going to commercialize. I know hundreds of people have had the same story. It's not your first idea that matters. It's how you maneuver yourself once you're in, I suppose, the ecosystem and listening to your clients and identifying where the real problems are. And don't be too proud to acknowledge you got it wrong and to switch. Part of that actually came through mentor. Our pivot was with our mentors, and we can talk a bit more about that, but probably without having good mentors around me, we may not have pivoted the business and we probably would have died.
Tell us a little bit about, I tend to agree with you 100%, Gerard. This idea that you have an idea and then you must execute it at all costs is absolutely a fallacy. All businesses, doesn't matter, even if they're 10 years old, if they see a new opportunity, they should pivot to it and they should take it. Doesn't mean they should throw everything else out, but they should listen to the market. So let's talk a little bit about this journey. Remind me, how long? When did you start?
So 2016. So we're now 5 years.
So 5 years old. And the last 2 years you're globalized. So, you know, in a pandemic, you're right in the face of that and decide that you're going to go global. We'll talk about that in a minute. Talk to us a little bit about the early part of the journey, right? So you mentioned some mentors that you had connected with in the early part of it. I'm interested in sort of two things there is, how did you find them? How did you know they were right? And then what did you do in this first big part of this journey? Because it is a common question that I get and we get here at EduGrowth, which is about how do I find a good mentor? Can you introduce me to someone? So I'm interested in that piece.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I get asked that a lot too. It's all well and good. You're telling us to get mentors, but how do you go find the right mentor, and two, convince them to be your mentor? I realized early on when I started a business, I had no idea what I was doing. I thought being in corporate and being an advisor in a consulting firm that I knew everything, and then I'd crossed the other side of the table and started doing it. I was so out of my depth. It's actually quite funny to think about it. So I realized pretty quickly, wow, I need to get some people around me who have done it before. I didn't go and seek mentors in the corporate world. I stayed right away from it, and I went and found mentors who had actually built businesses before. I was very lucky in that my co-founder, Dominic Saporito, had many businesses before. So he naturally became an unofficial mentor and a really important one. We can probably dig a bit deeper on that later about the importance of your co-founders. But my main mentor in those early years was a guy called Paul Breen, and I was going to a lot of startup events. So before I started the business and as we're getting into it, I'll be attending probably 2 events every week. Now that's pre-COVID, right? So you could do that, but you can still attend events online. And next year there's going to be so many events happening. But I just wanted to immerse myself into the ecosystem and be around other entrepreneurial people, because coming from an accounting background, accountants are the most un-entrepreneurial people you'll meet your life other than lawyers. So surround yourself by more entrepreneurial people. And I went to an event, it was actually at Pitcher Partners where I used to work, and there's a guy speaking there called Paul Breen, who's the guest speaker. And I just resonated with this guy sitting in the audience, and I thought, if I'm going to need an advisor or a mentor, I think this could be the guy. So I went and found someone in the audience who introduced him. So the guy, usually someone introduces a speaker like David's doing to me now. So I went up to the person that was David and said, how do I meet Paul? Can you introduce me? He goes, yeah, of course I'll introduce you. Because remember, no one actually does this, right? Everyone thinks other people does it, but no one does it. So the guy, Greg Nielsen, took me up to Paul and said, hey, Paul, I know Gerard. I think you guys should have a chat. We had a little chat. And then I said to Paul, look, if you got time now, can I quickly buy you a coffee? So no problem. Went downstairs on William Street in Melbourne, and we had a coffee. From that, I said, look, Paul, I really enjoyed the discussion. Would you mind if I drove out to where you work in a month's time or in a few weeks' time and we continue this conversation? Yep, no problem. So I put something in his diary. I drove to where his office was so that he only had to walk down the street to meet me for a coffee. Went and had another coffee. Really enjoyed the discussion. I could see the value in it. And then the approach I took, I said to Paul, I need to build an advisory board, Paul, because I'm out of my depth and I need people around me. Do you know anyone? So I used it as, who do you know? He goes, oh, yeah, there's a few people. And I said, oh, but, if you're interested, Paul, then, let me know. I'd love to talk to you about it. And that's when it actually transpired, saying, you know what, I'm interested in what you're doing, Gerard. I think we could go somewhere from there. And then he's now chairman of our board. He's an investor. He's helped us raise more money. Years on, he's still part of our board. But it was me taking the initiative. The warm introduction helped. I didn't try and push stuff onto him straight away. And the other thing I made sure, and I said about the advisory board, I said, this is what I need from the advisory board for the, right now. So he knew what the purpose of it was. And it wasn't just a mentoring thing. It was, I actually want you to be part of an advisory board for me, which ends up being a mentor. Now, from that day onwards, I mean, I'd speak to Paul 3 times a week, particularly in the first 3 years. 3 or 4 times a week we'd be having phone calls, and he was instrumental in helping me.
So there are two things I want to dive a little bit deeper into. One is the co-founder thing, which I want to come back to. But you also said something about finding advisors from startups in your sort of, I guess what you mean is in your journey or on your similar path, as opposed to, you know, the CEO of BHP, right? Not that there's anything wrong with him or her, but, you know, it's about what you're needing. So do you want to talk about that, and then we'll come back to the co-founder thing?
Yeah, I'm going to speak pretty frankly, and I might annoy a few people, but I've met a lot of corporates over the years, and I was one of them, that think they have the right to go and mentor entrepreneurs because they've advised businesses and entrepreneurial businesses. They think they've got the experience to be able to go and mentor entrepreneurs. And I did that. I remember I actually mentored a company when I was working at Pitch Partners. And I look back now and I feel like the biggest fraud. And I think, oh my God, the advice I would have been giving would have been horrendous. Because until you've done it, you haven't done it. And it's completely different to being all in, money on the line, as opposed to sitting on the sidelines. But I remember going to a lot of events early on, and there was, I mean, half the room would be full of corporate people just wanting to be involved in startups. And there'd be a lot of people putting their hand up to mentor startups. My advice is I think they're not the right people to do it. I think go and find someone that's built a business before and find those people to be your mentor, because the actual part you need the mentoring on the most is actually the mental side of things, not about strategy necessarily. But it's hard, right? Building a business is the hardest thing I've ever done. And there's some days where it's really tough. It really knocks you around. People that have been through it will guide you through that process in a way that people that haven't been through it can't. So yeah, I just think people that build it before, try and get them to be your mentors as opposed to people who just advise people. There's a difference.
I'll jump in there as well, and I'll share something with everyone. And that is, my personal view is that when you get advice from someone, you should actually disregard all of it and only keep the bits that make sense for you, because there's no one knows your journey but you. So they can give you some pointers and advice, but you've got to be able to find the intelligence and the insight that makes sense to your journey, not to their journey, because they also have a bias. It's really important. I think that's a key part of what you're saying, Gerard, there around the corporate advice versus your actual need. So I wanted to ask, before we jump into the co-founder thing, I wanted to ask you about, how do you define what you need? Because I think you said that once or twice, right? You need to work out what you need before you can go and ask someone else to answer that.
Yeah, and it's different at different points in time. So there's, as you go through the business life cycle, you need different advice and support. The support I need now and the mentoring I need now is very different to what I needed 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was getting our first staff members. It was looking at what our first revenue, our first clients were going to be like. And even at that stage, I remember speaking to Paul on the phone one day about, oh my God, and we nearly had a client and I lost him and I was devastated by it. And Paul goes, you know what the best thing in sales is? He goes, what, next? What do you mean? He goes, next one, next one, next one. So like that's the type of advice I needed back then to keep me going, because I was getting devastated by these little things. Now we're at a stage of business where we're doing a very substantial capital raise, and the people, the mentoring I need around me right now, and I've managed to get them around me, if people that have raised 30, 40, $50 million rounds and they're publicly listed companies, and it's a very different amount of advice. So when the conversation with those people is, we need to go and raise $10 million. How are we going to do it? And what's the execution plan? Who do we need to speak to? So you don't get a mentor at day one and they're necessarily going to take you all the way through. Work out as you go. I actually need different advice here. And on what David said before, go and get advice from 3 or 4 different people and take in what you think is relevant, because not all advice is gospel, right? So the more
none of it is, please. None of it's gospel, right?
Yeah.
Right? None of it's gospel. It's someone's thought, right? It's only their thought, because let me be really clear. If they really knew, they'd be doing it themselves, right? Like if they knew exactly what the best thing for your business was, they'd go and do it. They don't need you. So it's really important. I actually see lots of people who go out looking for advice from others, and don't do an assessment of the bias that person's bringing. It's a little bit like reading the news and going, that's obviously gospel because it's on the news. Well, what's the source of the news, who's been quoted, how other people quoting it. And I think that's really true about mentoring too.
Yeah.
But I think your point there, Gerard, about having a different mentor for different stages and different things is so incredibly valuable. And I see the irony that we've just created when we started talking not 10 minutes ago about how do I find my first mentor, and now we're saying you don't need one, you need 27. All right. And so I do see that irony. And I want to go, which is a nice little way to, I'll just plug two little things for people to know, is that there is a program if you're under 40. If you're under 40 years of age, there is a program called the Observership, which is a formal program. It's a competitive process to get into, and the Observership connects you with the chair or the CEO of various organizations, and you can pick them, you get matched to them, and you actually sit in their board as an observer for a 12-month period, which can you can get great insight into how other organizations operate. So back to you for a minute, Gerard, and just let's talk a little bit about your co-founder and the relationships that you have with co-founders and what you've gained as a benefit from it.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to speak from a biased perspective, as David just talked about. And for anyone, if I end up mentoring anyone in this group, just remember my advice is biased too, right? I can't help that. It's my experiences. I was very lucky in that my co-founder was 15 years older than me. So Dom had businesses before. He was also a chartered accountant. So, but what it meant that on the journey, I had this person that had been through it before. So when the lows happened, Dom's like, who cares? Like one of his sayings is nothing's as bad as you think it is, and nothing's ever as good as you think it is. Right. And so when you've got someone around you that can ride the journey with you, because there's times when your co-founder is going to feel crap, and there's times when you're going to feel crap. And the best, I think, dynamic between founders is you pick each other up when the other one's struggling. And we've done that really well with each other. But I've got far more benefit out of it than what Dom has, because he was older, he'd done it before, and he by default became a massive mentor for me. I think if we ask Dom, and he's going to be on the speed dating later, that I've also been a mentor for him in return, not to probably the same extent and for different things, but there's elements I've brought on my journey that, I can have conversations with Dom about certain things that he's taken benefit from. So I suppose my view with the co-founder thing is don't treat yourself as mentors to each other as much as business partners. And my biggest bit of advice around this is you don't have to pretend that you know everything. In fact, do the opposite. Pretend you know nothing. And then if you have that attitude and that open mindset, I think, and you're curious and you ask questions and you ask for help, I think you're more likely to succeed. But in society that we live in today, people put on this brave face because they think that everyone thinks that you need to know everything. Get rid of it. Don't worry about it. Put the ego aside. Pretend you know nothing and just ask people. And you don't have to use it all, but just ask.
I think it's an African proverb. It's either African or Chinese, but I think it's African, which is along the lines of, if you want to go fast, go on your own. If you want to go far, go with someone, right? Yeah. And that's sort of what you're saying, right? If it depends on what you're trying to achieve in the next journey and whether or not you go on your own or you bring someone with you. But I agree with this idea that co-founders should be complementary, plus also be, what's the language? Not argumentative, but should be able to challenge each other professionally, right? And
you don't
challenge ideas.
You don't want two people the same. That's pointless. And Dom and I, we're quite similar, but we're very different. But two people exactly the same, it's not a good fit.
Just a reminder that you can ask questions and they will appear here. And I'll ask the producer to just put up that last question of Fiona about, that's the one. You want to have a crack at that, Gerard?
So the question is, you mentioned the mentor side as the hardest. I agree, but want to know how you deal with the challenges that knock you about. Yeah, Fiona, good question. I was never prepared for this. There's still one. Some people did a little documentary on me years ago, and I actually talked about this. There was one day I went to a conference, and this is when we pivoted the business, and I realized that our business model was stuffed. It was wrong, and I've raised $500,000. I'm going to let everyone down. I'm going to waste everyone's money. I'm a failure. It I left the conference early. I went home and I laid on the couch for a day and a half. It absolutely hit me for six. I'll never forget this day forever. And I look back now and think how stupid it was, but I was not prepared for it at all, Fiona. My advice to you is to get people around you can have the conversations with. I didn't do it in the first few years. So if I was feeling crap and I was getting stressed and getting anxious, and I was mainly, what made me anxious was losing people's money. I didn't care about losing my money. I didn't care about the hits my ego if the business failed. I was petrified of losing other people's money. And our first round was the 3 Fs, the family, friends, and the fools. So if the business went bust, I lost my family's money. And that petrified the hell out of me. And what I didn't do in the first few years was talk to someone about it when I was getting scared and getting anxious about it. I found every time you speak to someone about it, you're not worried about it anymore. Talking is the simplest thing you can do. Most people are hesitant to do it, but if I could give you an advice, Fiona, just find someone. It could be a colleague, it could be anyone. And even if you had another startup founder or something, do a deal with them. Say, look, I promise you, if you pick up the phone, you want to have a chat, I'll answer, and you do the same thing for me. But if something goes shit in your life, call me, and vice versa. And then if you've got another startup founder, you can have this conversation with, because you don't have a founder to do it with or something. Maybe that's something to put in place, because just talking about it, you'd be shocked how much of a difference it makes.
There's a couple of other questions, but I'll also add on to that as well, Gerard. And I agree 100% with you that the idea is, my experience has been what you are experiencing is what others are experiencing, but people don't talk about it, right? So if you are running a business, you are employing people, you're taking other people's money, and you don't wake up occasionally at 3 a.m. in the morning going, what am I doing? And why do they think I can do it? Then you're probably not pushing the envelope fast enough, right? Like there should be times when you're feeling like you're on the edge of, what is going to come across that hill. So I agree with you. And my experience has been founding and exiting businesses and leading businesses. It doesn't matter whether it's $1, $1 million. It doesn't matter it's community money like at EduGrowth or whether it's government money. Anytime you're spending other people's money, you should have some healthy, respect for the fact that it is somebody else's money. So awesome. Great question here from Pablo. Can I get someone to pop that up on the screen for us? How would you go about finding mentors to help you design what your team should look like? Pablo.
Good question, Pablo. I must admit, this is probably the part I've found the most challenging in having a business. I've played around with a million org charts, recut it, got rid of it, done it again, asked people. It's actually, the people side of business is actually really hard, and you're not prepared for it. So to get the right mentors to help you with that, I actually don't know the answer to that question, if I'm going to be honest about it. I might even throw it to David, because David probably might have a different angle to it with me. But we're currently, because we're growing quite a bit at the minute, we've activated different parts of the world. We're actually working on our org chart right now and the people that we need. And this has been going on for 3 months and we haven't nailed it yet. So maybe I don't have the right advisors around me, Pablo, to design it properly. But the other thing is, it's a very fluid environment. So the org chart we did 6 months ago is actually irrelevant now. We've had to turf it. We've done it again. So an org chart, the design of your team, isn't a set and forget. It's literally something that you're doing every single month. We're going through some staff changes at the minute deliberately, and it's every month we're changing it. So maybe, I don't know if that helps at all, but David, what do you think about that?
I agree with absolutely everything you said. So personally, I have a healthy disrespect for human resource people, and I say healthy disrespect, right? I know that what they do is incredibly valuable. My experience, I'll just say what I say, and I've said to every team that I've led, and that is, my experience is that people just do jobs. They don't get promoted to them. They just see there's an opportunity. They start doing that work, and then somebody wakes up and says, oh, we need a head of, oh, you've been doing that for the last 6 months, 12 months, and you do it. So I think that's a sort of my experience in any small business, whether it's a small business or a startup, is that you do what's in front of you today. Don't get pressures about what you're going to do. And at some point you put structure about it. But I think it's always that question of what comes first, the customer, the capital, or the work. And I don't know the answer to it. I think it all sort of comes at once in my experience. But if somebody else has got some fantastic insight there as to when you start to scale it. I will add that we have our Clear Paths Linke program, and we had about a year or two ago, I can't say the name of the person, but we did have somebody come and speak to us about how they assess staff in scaling up businesses, and they used a model of an A person, a B person, a C person, and a D person, and they had a quadrant. And at the time, I took great offense to this idea of labeling people A, B, C, and D, and he and I had a deep conversation about it. But it was really about putting people in this quadrant of, are these people living our values? Are they doing the work? Can they take on more? Do they show who we want to be? And it's a really interesting framework that's easily available. You can find it in any of the Rockefeller habits where they talk about classification of staff and which ones you should and shouldn't promote. So that's a place to start. And my experience with all of those Rockefeller consultants is, if you ask them, I'll speak to you as well. The other thing is, I don't know if you had this experience, Gerard, but when you ask people, they want to help, right?
Yeah, 100%. I've never asked anyone for help that said no.
And people think they get asked for more help all the time, and therefore they say no. But in fact, my experience is people are willing to help. So if you ask, you sometimes don't get the answer you want, though, by the way. You may not necessarily get what you want. So you do have to spend that little bit of prep time up front. I think there's a couple of other questions in here. You want to put up the last question for me, Sarah? Do you have a pro bono or paid advisory board? If so, what would you pay your advisors?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So what we did early on, we couldn't afford to pay really advisors. I actually think paying for an advisor is a good thing because it gives commitment on both sides. So that mentor or that advisor is committed to do something because there's actually a transaction that's happening. What we did early on with Paul is that we committed to doing $500 a month. So it was a not too onerous amount. And we did that for the first, I can't remember, it was 3 or 6 months to see how the dynamic went and if we liked each other and if we thought it was going to work. So we trialed it that way. I thought it was important we wanted to pay him something because I can hold him accountable. And a lot of mentoring relationships disappear, or advisory boards disappear because there's no commitment on both sides, really. Then after 3 or 6 months, we then, I think might have increased that to $1,000 or something going after that. But have an honest conversation with someone that you want to, if it's a really formal environment, if it's just a mentoring thing and it's a bit more friendly, yeah, I think people will give up their time to do it as long as you make it easy for them. But if you then want to transition to an advisory board, I would try and pay something, even if it's $100 a month, because just in doing that makes both parties committed to it.
Can I add another piece in there as well? And I've said this many times to many other people, your desire to be on a board should rule you out from ever being allowed to be on that board. Yeah. So you should have to harangue people to join that if it's your advisory board. I don't think payment, you should not be considering paying an advisor until you have a sustainable revenue model or the investment to support it, because otherwise you may be spending capital on that advice that could go into execution. You've got to balance execution and strategy. That's first comment. Second comment is that when you start building an advisory board, there is a specific center that you can use as a suggestion. There's an entity called the Advisory Board Center, where they have certified advisors that have gone through certification process, I guess is the term. They've gone through some training and they've been certified. And they have set fees, depending upon the size of your company, which starts at about $500 or $600 per sitting, and then goes out to about $2,500, $3,000 per sitting, which basically means if you're running 6 advisory board meetings in a year, you're going to be paying $3,000 or $4,000 at the bottom end and something like whatever it is, $15,000 to $20,000 at the top end for the year. And that sort of is a good way to get started. The other thing I'll also add in there, if you're thinking about advisory boards, is balancing investors with non-investors. You got to make sure that you've got some non-investors in your advisory network as well, because they're slightly different. I think we've probably got to the end of our conversation. I wanted to leave with one thing, really, Gerard. I know that you're building MentorMatch, and I know that you're doing some really interesting things there. So I'm keen to understand why you're building MentorMatch and what do you hope to do with it?
Yeah, so and just before I answer that question too, guys, there's a difference between an advisory board and a board. I would try and go advisory board for as long as you can before you put anyone formally on your board. That's just probably another bit of experience that we went through. But MentorMatch, yeah, so we're building MentorMatch through partnership with Civic Labs, LaunchVic. EduGrowth's actually been involved in the sidelines as advisory too. David's actually advised on it. That
should rule me out from even speaking to you using my own rule, Gerard. Sorry, I forgot about that bit.
But the concept came about due to international students and their social connectiveness. We deal a lot with international students, and we do a lot with internship placements. But the part that was missing was having mentoring outside of the university sector. And for 2 years, we built a relationship with Rotary. And literally, it was at least 18 months we're building our relationship with Rotary. There's probably another bit of advice here. Relationships take a long time. Transactional stuff that you think happens just doesn't happen overnight. And so we brought Rotary together with Study Melbourne, Global Vic for the international students to bring together these parties for the purpose of mentoring. So the Rotarians are the mentors, obviously, international students as mentees, and they've gone and built a technology platform, MentorMatch, to bring it all together. We're now actually looking at expanding that into other little areas as well that we can use MentorMatch for. But it came about because we were observing through the work that we're doing as another pain point in our ecosystem, which is the students are saying, oh, how do I get a mentor? I can't get one. And because they don't have a network here, and we happen to be talking to Rotary that really want to get involved in mentoring. So we had the coming together of this perfect storm. And so it was problem-led. We were experiencing the problem. We came up with a solution. Lucky enough to get into the Civic Labs program. We've gone and built out MentorMatch. We've done the first pilot. We're now starting on the next batch of it. Yeah, it's really exciting where we can take it actually, so we can do it at scale and focused on a really, it was niche to begin with actually that we can expand.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on the work of getting Outcome.life to where it is now, 5 years in, and now you're building out MentorMatch and MentorMatch. So I'm intrigued to see what the next 5 years brings for you, and I'm sure you'll acquire and dispose of mentors as you need them as you go along the journey. So good luck, Gerard.
Thank you, David.
I think actually, sorry, I'm not supposed to let you go. Someone's screaming in my ear. I think we're supposed to, you've got some key points apparently. You've got a slide of some key points that you wanted to leave people with.
Oh, great. Let me read it.
Have you seen them before? These are the points that you wrote.
I think these are the stuff we probably covered. Your co-founders, what is it you write? Mentor is hard, time-consuming. Yeah, I think so on that second point, as a mentee, the responsibility is on you. This is my belief anyway. David might disagree with me. It's the onus is on the mentee to make it work, to book the meetings in, to make sure it's happening, to set an agenda. Do not rely on your mentor. I don't think it's their responsibility to do all that work. If as a mentee, you're not prepared to do it, I don't think you're respecting the mentor relationship. So put the effort in to make it happen and you'll get the benefit out of it. And yeah, we said before, try and get your mentors through the startup ecosystem if you can.
Fantastic. Gerard, thanks very much for your time today. I've certainly learned some stuff, so I'm sure others as well. Thanks very much, mate.
Thanks, Dave.
So this is session 4 of 5 in our LaunchPad program in this group of events that we're doing. We're about to move into networking and into the final piece of today's afternoon session. And I'm going to work out how that works in just a second. But the final session for us in this program, which is in a couple of weeks' time, it's on the 7th of December, is going to be a session where we're going to get direct feedback from some customers. It's called Voice of the Customer. So 3 K-12 and 3 higher education focused pitches will be done, and from those pitches you'll then get feedback from these mentors. These are people in schools, in classrooms, in universities who will give you feedback on what they think your product is and how you might want to make it better. So there's a link there which I think will also be up in the chat so that you can just click it straight through. If you want to be one of those 6 companies, you just need to express interest. You need to give us some details, fill in some information about you before, so that we can make sure we've matched to the right people. So it's a really great session that the team have organised, and that's the 7th of December. Somebody will put in chat for you when the expressions of interest close. The other thing, if you've been enjoying these programs, we do have an online course. It's called LaunchPad Essentials Online. It basically helps you understand how to build an EdTech company for K-12 or higher ed. It has, I don't know, there's a huge number, something like 80 or 90 video snippets from about 15 or 20 EdTech entrepreneurs who have gone on the journey before you. It's hosted on the Open Learning Platform, one of our strategic partners. I think there's going to be a link on the chat. If you also go to the EduGrowth website and go to LaunchPad, you'll then find online learning. I think it's called, or LaunchPad Essentials. And from there, you'd be able to register and get access to that program. In 2022, we are going to be running wait a sec, I think I'm doing that later. Sorry, now I'm supposed to be introducing you to go to the LaunchPad Essentials speed dating networking thing. So on the screen, if you click that button, which I think says participate, it's very hard for me to see, but I think that's what it is. If you click participate, you'll be able to go in there and you'll be matchable. I'm being told it says network. So if you click that thing that says network, from in there, you'll then be able to go, I think you may need to put in some details about yourself, and then from there, you'll be able to match with people. And we're going to run that for about half an hour or 45 minutes, and then we'll be back here.